guys, and welcome back to another Mystery Monday video on my channel. Today I don't have absolutely anything to say right now, so let's get right into today's case. Zigmund Adamski, who was also known to family and friends as Ziggy, was a 56-year-old Polish man who had recently moved to England. He was now living in the town of Tingley in West Yorkshire with his wife Lodi. Lodi, or Lottie, and Zigmund had met in Poland and moved together to England. Zigmund was a coal miner and was fairly happy in his life where he was right now. He was really happy with his wife and really happy to be in England and just happy in his job and absolutely everything. On June 6, 1980, Zigmund Adamski had left his home to head to the grocery store to buy some potatoes. Now the weather that day was absolutely beautiful, so Zigmund decided to walk because the grocery store wasn't that far from his house. After leaving his house, he engaged in a short conversation with his neighbor who said that everything about Zigmund that day seemed fairly normal. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and the conversation that they had was a very normal conversation that you'd have with your neighbor. The walk from the Adamski home to the grocery store was only about 1 mile, meaning that it only should have taken Zigmund about 1 hour to get to the grocery store to buy the potatoes and get back home. But sadly, Zigmund Adamski would never return home that day. And of course, his wife became very worried because of this, and she informed the police. But after the police did an investigation, it seemed that Zigmund Adamski had just disappeared off the face of the earth. That was until just 5 days after Zigmund's disappearance on July 11th, 1980. Zigmund's body was discovered in a coal yard 25 miles away from his home in the town of Todmorden. His body was discovered by the coal yard owner's son, Travis, who had been preparing for the afternoon shift around 3:45 when he noticed a body on top of a very high pile of coal. Police were called immediately and arrived to the scene pretty quickly, and that is when Travis had told them that he had also been at the coal yard around 11 a.m. and when he had left, he had locked the gate, and nobody had been on the coal yard since that time to his knowledge. Meaning that for some time within those 5 hours where Travis was away from the coal yard, Zigmund's body somehow ended up there. And just a little side note here of something that I want to mention is Zigmund had no connection to the town that he was found in, and he had absolutely no reason to be there. Paramedics arrived at the scene, and it was determined that Zigmund had suffered from cardiac arrest, and due to the strange circumstances that his body was found in, it was believed at this time that foul play was involved. When Zigmund's body was discovered, he was laying flat facing upwards towards the sky as if his body had just been dropped there. He had second-degree burns all over his shoulders and his back, and these burns were covered in a gel-like substance that suggested to investigators that previous to his death, somebody had tried to treat his wounds. Now, this part of the case is something that really stood out to me personally, as well as a lot of other people online while reading about this case. And that is that the way that Zigmund was dressed when he was found was as if whoever had dressed him was not familiar with dressing the human body. His jacket was completely done up opposite as to how we would do it up, and his pants and belt were just done up completely wrong, as well as his shoes. And his wallet and his watch were both missing. Despite the fact that Zigmund had been missing for 5 days, his clothes were in absolutely perfect condition, and his body appeared so clean that it was almost as if he had just gotten out of the shower. And on top of all of that, it appeared that he only had 1 day of stubble since he vanished, meaning that his hair on his beard had only grown worth 1 day. How is that even possible? There was no coal dust on Zigmund's body or clothes at all, and there was actually no sign of anybody climbing up the coal pile, so how he actually ended up on top of there is a complete mystery. Alan Godfrey, who is actually the head investigator of Zigmund's case, said that when the body was discovered, it appeared that Zigmund was frozen with fear at the time of his death. The coroner also determined that he believed that Zigmund was undergoing either extreme pain or horror at the time of his passing. It was also determined that Zigmund had died on the day that his body was discovered between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. Zigmund, in the time that he was missing, had been eating a lot of healthy foods. But on the day that he was found deceased and on the day that he had passed away, he hadn't eaten anything at all. The burns covering Zigmund Adamski's body were found to be inflicted 2 days before his death, and the gel that was found on top of these burns was tested but remains unidentified. All of the hospitals in the area at that time were searched to see if anybody fitting Zigmund Adamski's description possibly checked in seeking medical attention, but this just led investigators to a dead end because Zigmund Adamski had never appeared to have entered a hospital, at least not in the time that he was missing anyways. Zigmund Adamski was a well-liked man who didn't have any signs of mental health, and actually it was said by his wife at this time that he had no enemies and that there was a wedding coming up in the family that he was really looking forward to. But after digging in this case a little bit, I found that there was some kind of family feud going on with Zigmund Adamski as well as Lodi and one of their family members. And this family member was a woman, and this woman's husband her and her husband were having some issues, so this woman came to stay at the Adamski home. But this woman's husband was really unhappy with the situation. And because of this all going on, it is said that Zigmund Adamski was actually really dreading going to this family wedding, but I will talk about that a little bit later on in the video. Now, as you probably guessed throughout this video, Zigmund Adamski's death is often chalked up to aliens. And the strange thing about this is the town where he was found is actually a UFO hotspot. And the town is called Todmorden, which I mentioned earlier, which actually means dead murder in German. In November of 1980, 6 months after Zigmund's body was discovered, Alan Godfrey, who again was the head investigator on Zigmund's case, was called to investigate cattle in the area that was disappearing and reappearing. Now, I know how crazy that sounds, but I did do research on this, and it was actually a phenomenon that was happening in the area at that time. Godfrey was driving down Burnley Road when he saw what he thought was a double-decker bus flipped over on its side about 200 miles down the road. Of course, being a police officer and thinking that something could be wrong and that there was some kind of accident and people could be hurt, Godfrey decided to stop and look at the scene. And that is when he discovered that whatever he was looking at was not a bus, and whatever it was hovering about 5 feet above the ground. He immediately tried to call for backup, but the 2 radios that he had in his car would not work. Not knowing what else to do, he pulled out his pad and decided to scratch down the time and the date and kind of sketch what this object looked like. But he was only looking away from it for about 30 seconds, and when he looked back up, the UFO had just completely vanished. That is when Godfrey noticed that his car was about a quarter mile down from where he had originally stopped to look at what he thought was a bus. And like so many other alien abduction cases, he looked at the time and found that there was actually 30 minutes that he couldn't account for. He also later noticed that the toes of his police boots were really scuffed and ripped up, as if he had been dragged across the ground. So at this point, he was obviously really freaked out, so he returned back to the police station and asked some of his fellow officers to come with him to search for the missing cattle. The cattle were later discovered in a field that could only be accessed through a locked gate, and when they got to this field, the gate was still locked. And at this time it was raining, so the field that the cows were found in was really muddy and mucky and just gross. But the strange thing about this was there was absolutely no footprints left by the cattle except for exactly where they were standing. The next morning, Godfrey decided to make a formal report of his experience that he had the previous night. And that is when he found out that there was another motorist who reported that they had seen a strange light on the same road just about 3 miles down from where Godfrey had his experience. 2 weeks after Godfrey's encounter, news of what he had seen had been released to the public. And because of this, Godfrey was given a really hard time by his fellow officers as well as the entire department and town. Godfrey was extremely embarrassed by this, and due to the instant bullying that came along with his encounter being released to the public, he was forced to quit his job. The department that Godfrey had worked for had actually forced him to undergo some psych evaluations and medical tests just to make sure that he was of sound mind. And Godfrey actually passed every single test. And after leaving the police department, Godfrey actually underwent hypnosis. Now, I did watch his hypnosis video, but it was very, very short, although it did seem like that was the whole entire session. I'm not sure if there is more of it online somewhere, so after I'm done filming this, I'm going to go search again, and if I can find a longer version of his hypnosis video, I will link that down below, but for now I'm just going to talk about the short one that I seen. He said that the object that he had seen that he originally thought was a bus was about 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. He said that it was shaped like a diamond, and he thought that the bottom part of the ship was rotating, but the top part was completely stationed. He remembered noticing that the trees around his car were shaking violently, but he said inside of his car he couldn't feel or hear anything. He said after this he felt like he was asleep, but he could feel that either his car or himself were floating. When he came to from this sleep state that he was in, he was with a humanoid who he said was very tall, about 6'6", and very, very slim. This humanoid also had a beard and was wearing a white gown. He said that despite the situation that he was in, Godfrey felt really comfortable and relaxed being with this humanoid, and he said that this humanoid felt very familiar to him as if they had met before. He said that this humanoid told him to get onto the bed that was in the room with them, but Godfrey said that he didn't speak, it was more of a telepathic communication. After Godfrey had complied and got onto this bed, he said that 7 to 8 other creatures entered this room, and these creatures were not like the humanoid that was taking care of him before, and he said upon these creatures entering the room, he was struck with absolute terror. He said that their heads were lemon-shaped and that they had black holes for eyes. He said that they were also roughly the size of a 5-year-old, and he would say that they were about 3'4". Now, in the hypnosis video that I watched, after this, he said that he couldn't recap anything and just remembers waking up in his car. But again, if I find a longer hypnosis video or a video where he can recap more information, I will link that down below. But I do think it's possible that this short hypnosis session was the only one that he underwent, because I can genuinely say that when these creatures entered the room, he looks absolutely horrified. And he starts saying that he doesn't want to remember this and he doesn't want to remember them. So there is very well, maybe he was just like, I've had enough, please let's stop doing this, I don't want to remember this horrible event. But personally, again, I think in this hypnosis video, he genuinely looks absolutely terrified. The obvious theory in both of these cases that go hand in hand together is that both of these men underwent some kind of alien abduction. It is possible that they abducted Zigmund and just pushed him too far, and that is how he passed away. And that could also be why it seemed that his wounds were treated for, but they couldn't identify the gel that was found on his body. And due to the other absolutely crazy things that were going on in the town of Todmorden at that time, I do think that it is very possible that all of this could be attributed to alien abduction. Now, I know some of you are probably really skeptical about aliens, and listening to me speak about this case like this probably makes me seem absolutely crazy. But because of all of the strange things that were going on and the strange aspects of Zigmund's case, as well as Alan Godfrey's encounter, I do think that it is very difficult to peg these cases to absolutely anything else, although there is another theory in Zigmund Adamski's case. Now, this theory has to do with the family feud that was going on in Zigmund's family. So this theory goes that the family member who was fighting with her husband was actually staying with Zigmund, and it is said that her husband, as we know, was already very angry at the situation. So it is said that this husband maybe got even more enraged about the situation and decided to kidnap Zigmund. He then kept Zigmund in a shed and tortured him with battery acid until he eventually suffered from a heart attack that killed him. Then the assailant panicked and dumped Zigmund Adamski's body at the coal yard. But just a few questions that I have about this theory in particular that kind of make me question it is, if his end goal was to murder Zigmund, then why did he keep him well fed, and why did he try and treat his wounds after he inflicted them? Also, when Zigmund Adamski's body was discovered, why was he so strangely dressed, and how did he get on top of the coal pile without anybody identifying the fact that somebody had actually climbed up it? There was no evidence suggesting that anybody had even touched the coal pile before police got there. So that is just something that I think is kind of weird in this theory. This case is absolutely crazy and mind-blowing, and again leaves me with more questions than answers. My heart sincerely goes out to Zigmund Adamski's loved ones and family and anybody who was affected by his case, because this is a really hard one. Not knowing what happened to somebody like this would drive me absolutely crazy. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. Like always, if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and also comment down below what you think about this case and what you'd like to see in my future videos. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any more future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week for another video. Bye guys!